guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today we will take a look at some new Just No HOA content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Karen claims BBQs are illegal, calls 911 and wants to shoot me. This is actually a pretty recent incident that happened shortly after I moved to a suburb in Houston with my wife and our 2 little girls. My mother is Korean while my father is Vietnamese. They met when they were attending their college in Oklahoma and had me soon after they settled down in that same city. So, while I'm very obviously Asian in my looks, my accent tells everyone that I've been born and raised in the US. My wife's uncle had helped us pick the nice neighborhood that was only an hour away from his own house and only a 15 minutes walk to a nice school that we had picked for our girls. It's only our first day moving in and we are already being warned about the infamous Karen of this neighborhood. Now I know every place has one, but I was glad to see that here everyone agreed that she was a douche. I was personally not worried about any comments directed to myself. You kind of get used to people being entitled and judging you. But my daughters were already struggling because of a change of schools, and I wanted them to have as easy of a moving as possible. The Karen's house was across the road from us, but we were at least happy for the neighbors on our sides who were mixed-race couples themselves and hence understood our problems. But of course, one cannot escape danger when it was literally hell-bent on finding you. Just like other residents, we too could not dodge the many nasty encounters with this Karen. The first week of our stay had been quiet, but the next week this Karen had knocked at our door and told us to mow our garden because the tall grass did not suit the look of this neighborhood. I told her that we had literally moved in a week ago. We had too much on our plate to care about the damn grass, but of course it wouldn't go through her thick skull. I had quickly given up on making sense with her and nodded before shutting the door in her face. Later that same week I had found a note stuck on our car that said we needed to replace it because it was too cheap and again, did not suit the neighborhood. I had asked our neighbors about it and they had sighed like it has happened before. Apparently, it had, and dozens of times at that. This Karen had some kind of view for their neighborhood and she would regularly police others who did not follow her view. Which, in fact, also included not sunbathing in your own garden, not having pets that make too much noises, not having kids that make too much noise. She had screamed at us multiple times when our girls would play in our own garden and had even threatened to call police when we played piano in our own house in the morning. And above all, she was one of those preachy vegans who wanted none of us to have any kind of barbecue parties but wanted to be invited to events. I was told that there had once been a big vegetarian celebration thrown by an Indian couple that she had not been invited to, because obviously who would want to spend even a second around her, and she had gone on Facebook to complain about the outside culture that had taken residence in her neighborhood and ruined it. So, let us recount. Asshole, controlling, irritating vegan, party pooper and also, xenophobic. Classic Karen if you ask me. But that was that and I had honestly learned to tune her whining out, opting to only talk to the same neighbors around me. After 3 months had passed since we moved in our new house, my wife had suggested we throw a small party. And I know many of our neighbors enjoyed Korean barbecue that was served only in a few restaurants nearby, so I had thought, why not? It had been a while since I had thrown a proper Korean barbecue anyway and we all needed some break after moving. So, I had planned everything, brought all the ingredients and steaks from the Asian market nearby and had decided to throw it on a Saturday so that everyone can attend. Everyone except one person, of course. It had started off real nice. The sun wasn't too harsh that noon and everyone had settled down nicely in the open space, making small takes and taking portions of the barbecue. And of course, that was when the Karen had chosen to strike. She had yelled from across the street that we needed to stop this murder party and turn off the grill because the meat fumes were giving her a headache. I honest to God have no idea what she had meant by all that, but the bottom line was, she wanted us to stop the barbecue. Which obviously I was not going to do. We all ignored her and continued despite knowing that that would only provoke her. But I guess that day everyone wanted to provoke and poke at her and see how far she could go because everyone was simply done with her behavior. Sometimes we even felt bad because she was a widow and though she had 3 sons, no one was ever seen visiting her. But then she would snatch a burger from a teenager's hand or try to hit a dog that was barking loudly, and we would all go back to hating her. As I grilled the steak, I could hear her scream some more, this time threatening to come and stop me herself if I did not do what she said. I shook my head and continued on, knowing that with so many people there was no chance she could actually harm. She quiets down after this, and we almost think she is done harassing us until we hear sirens blazing in the distance. I look up and this Karen is standing in the middle of the road with the biggest smirk on her face, and I'm not even lying. I legit burst out in uncontrollable laughter at her idiocy. That seemed to piss her off even more, but the police cars have arrived by then and we can all hear her telling the officers how we are cooking illegal animals that is making her dizzy, and she also even had a seizure because of us. I turn around to face the guests and we have the same look on our face. I look back and the police officers also seem to be struggling to tell her that barbecue parties are not illegal and no, they cannot arrest anyone for throwing one. I make eye contact with one of the younger officers who shakes his head at me. I cannot even begin to imagine how many times this Karen might have called these poor officers. Anyway, I hold up a piece of steak as a silent invitation and the officer grins softly before he looks back, his stance suddenly defensive. A shot rang in the neighborhood. I grab my wife and girls and duck behind the wooden table that we bought for this occasion. Our guests are scrambling to find space to hide as the Karen finally goes crazy and shouts in the distance that we must obey her, and if she says the party stops, the party has to stop. I don't know what the police officers are doing, but I hear their voices trying to pacify her. Through the gaps in the wooden panels, I see this psychotic woman walking up to our house with a shotgun in her hands, and my blood runs cold until I see 3 officers jumps at her from behind and 1 zaps her. We all finally take a breath of relief and get up from our positions. The Karen is dragged to the car and placed inside as the young officer comes to check up on us. I ask him what will happen to her, and he says he is not sure but he will update us if he gets to know anything. Sometime later we are told that the Karen would be placed in a mental institution as her mental health was found to be bad and she has a hefty list of mental issues. We all do feel a bit of sympathy for her, but more than that we are all just glad that she is out of our hair. Now I can throw Korean BBQs without the fear of crazy Karens, and our neighbors can have a loud husky that my girls love to play with. The next story is titled, So, the Neighbor Had a Moose. I grew up in a bedroom community halfway between Cowtown and Big D. When we moved in, the population was around 3,000 to 4,000. This was not out in the country at all, and the houses were fairly close to each other, at least by Texas standards. My parents had 3 young boys, all under the age of 7, and while Dad worked a normal day shift, Mom worked nights and slept most of the day, leaving us boys pretty much to ourselves and whatever fun we could come up with, be it water fights with the garden hose or catching cicadas in the maple trees. As I said, Dad worked a normal day job, but liked to go to the lake for the weekends, which meant he had to hustle home from work and get the grass cut before the sun went down. The lot wasn't terribly large, but back in those days, there were no self-propelled mowers, and this was St. Augustine grass in the summertime. In other words, it was hardy and grew pretty fast. One week he came home and started cutting the grass as usual, but about 10 minutes into the job, he came storming into the housing swearing like a sailor. He didn't want to talk about it, but just ranted for about half an hour and then proceeded to finish cutting he grass without further incident. Just as it was beginning to get dark, Mom called us to dinner. We all washed up. Mom was a stickler for such things, and gathered at the dinner table. During the course of our evening meal, Mom asked us boys what we had been doing during the day. Whatever it was, it probably involved rocks or frogs or Tonka trucks. Next, Mom asked Dad how his day was, and he told her, boring adult stuff, yada yada. Next, she asked him what in the world happened that caused his earlier blow-up. He proceeds to tell her that one of our neighbors, an elderly woman who pretty much kept to herself, was the owner of a standard poodle named Moose. This dog was enormous, even by Texas standards, and was able to leap her 5-foot chain-link fence without breaking a sweat. Apparently, Moose had been making deposits in the front yard the size of dinner plates, and because the grass was growing tall so quickly, had been completely hidden. Of course, when Dad was mowing the grass, he hit more than a few of these Moose landmines with the lawnmower, spraying the front of the house and both cars in the driveway. It shouldn't take a genius to understand why he was so angry, but of course his boys. Yes, we all thought it was hysterically funny. Dad said, "The next time we find moose droppings in the front yard, I want a deposit made on that neighbor's doorstep." Challenge accepted. A few days later, Mom wakes up from her afternoon nap and hears water running, so being the mother of 3 boys, she decided to investigate. She stuck her head out of the back patio door and called out, "Boys! Why is the water running?" To which we replied, "We're just washing the dustpan, Mom." Half asleep, she said, "Okay, thank you," shook her head and headed back to bed. At dinner that night, the usual questions were asked. Just like any normal evening. But she went on and asked, "Boys, why were y'all washing the dustpan?" We looked at each other, shrugged, and as the oldest, I said, "Well, Dad told us the next time we found moose poop in the front yard, we were supposed to take it over to the neighbors and leave it on her doorstep, so we did. We just had to wash the dustpan, so we didn't get in trouble for bringing poop into the house." You could have heard a pin drop as both parents just sat there, staring at us. Whether in shock or their brains having to reboot after a fatal exception. I don't know. Then they both busted out laughing, not only at our brazenness, but that we followed Dad's instructions to the letter. You could say that was a turning point for them both. From that point forward, they were much more careful about what they said, and how they said it. Epilogue. The very next day, Moose moved to the country, away from nearby neighbors, who would not object to moose manure. The next story is titled, "No, I'm Checking Your Heart." I was a medic in Salt Lake for a few years. One rainy day, my partner and I got dispatched to a fairly upscale neighborhood on a call of chest pain. Chest pain means flashing lights and sirens. We quickly arrive in front of a pretty nice house and find a woman standing at the curb with 2 suitcases packed, already a red flag. I shut down the siren but kept the lights going for safety. We ask if she called 911 and she confirms. She steps into the ambulance, sits on the bench, and asks us to get going. I tell her we need to do a full workup before we leave, so we can provide care en route and take her to the right facility. She says she doesn't really have chest pain. She has a procedure scheduled at the hospital, and she wants me to turn off the flashing lights so her neighbors don't notice and ask her questions. Obviously, this is M's abuse, and I tell her so. Suddenly her chest pain is back. So, I say I need to get vitals and start an ECG. She protests again, mentioning the start time for her appointment in less than 30 minutes, and so I ask her point blank, "Do you need medical attention, or do we need the police?" I proceeded to do a full workup, in front of her house, taking my sweet-ass time, asking enough questions to make her eyes roll, and leaving the strobe lights on the whole time so the neighbors would see. And she was late to her appointment because we admitted her to the hospital through the instead of the front doors. The last story is titled, "An Entitled Person on a Flight?" No surprise. I wonder what is it about airplanes that makes them such a hotbed for entitled people all around the world. Just saw a post that reminded me of my recent interaction. A month ago, I had to travel suddenly for a family emergency. It was a distressing situation. I hadn't slept the whole night and had to take 2 connecting flights to reach home. Needless to say, that by the time I had boarded the flight for the last leg of the journey, I was thoroughly exhausted, and my patience was next to non-existent. I had gotten a seat in the last row of the plane. I was one of the last people to climb on board, and the air hostesses were already in the process of checking the overhead luggage bins, shutting them, and the usual stuff. As I reach my row, I see that the bins on both sides directly above my seat were full, so I started backtracking a bit to see if I could find a space to stow my backpack. A young woman was just behind me, and she had a kid about 1 to 2 years old who was being a bit cranky. Their seat was in the row just in front of mine. They had a small suitcase, and the lady was struggling to handle the kid, hold the suitcase and also search for a space for her luggage, same as me. I offered to help her, put my backpack on my seat, and picked up her suitcase to carry it to the front and find some space. A couple of rows ahead and on the opposite side, I found a luggage bin. Now the bin was packed at first glance. But I saw there were a couple of backpacks that were kept sideways, and if I turned them upright, I could easily fit the suitcase. The suitcase would also help pack the space and keep the backpack snug. I started turning the bag, and suddenly the guy in the row started shouting at me for mishandling and damaging his bag. I was like, "Dude, I'm just shifting the bag, not throwing it around." The guy, sarcastically, "Yeah, I can see that. I'm not going to let you damage it." Me, "Well then you shift it, and make space for the suitcase." The guy, "No, I'm not going to do that. The bin is my seats and I have the right to keep my stuff there." Me, getting pissed now, "We all have the right to keep our bags and there is no bin that is allotted to a seat. People just keep their bags nearby for convenience. The luggage bins aren't allotted. All I'm asking is please shift the bag or let me at least do it. I have to find space for my own bag too." As all of this is going on, the people are starting to stare, and I'm feeling a headache coming on. Feeling the idiot was not worth the trouble, I started to turn back. Suddenly the lady I was helping started scolding the guy for using foul language in front of a small kid. I got sidelined and these two started fighting, attracting enough attention for the air hostess to intervene and smoothen out the issue. She straightened the guy's bag and put the lady's suitcase up there. I'd had enough of the drama, so just put my backpack below my seat, not wanting to engage with anyone further. I did notice the guy glaring at me during the flight a couple of times, but I was just too tired to react. No dramatic ending or anything, just a shitty encounter with entitlement out in the wild. Thank you for listening.